I'm Judy Gradwall, President and CEO of the San Diego Natural History Museum, and it is my pleasure to invite you here tonight for this, what I believe will be an incredible conversation between Deborah Szekely and Marc Pachter. I first met Deborah just about a year ago, right after I arrived, and people at the museum said, well, you've got to meet Deborah. You meet her for lunch. And we had lunch together. At the end of lunch, she turned to me and said, we're going to be friends. And you know, anybody who knows Deborah knows if she says something like that, of course it's going to happen. And she has been incredibly generous, helping me learn the ropes around San Diego. And about, when did we go to Julian? Maybe a couple of months ago, we spent a couple of days up in Julian, and I heard her stories in the car and overnight, and I came back and I wrote to my friend Marc, who was a colleague of mine for 25 years at the Smithsonian. Marc was among other things, the director of the National Portrait Gallery and a biographer, and he created a series called Living Self-Portraits, which recognizes that many of us now are not having our portraits painted, and it's hard to figure out how to record the lives of intriguing and amazing Americans. And I sent him an email and said, you missed one. Would you come out of retirement? Would you fly out here and do this? And he agreed to do it. And so this is not an official Smithsonian program, but it's in an official Smithsonian style. And he can explain more about, you'll understand the technique as we go through. Before we start, I need to point out that there are emergency exits behind you and in front of you. We ask that there be no photography or recording. We are making a videotape of the program tonight, and we will make it available for people who have not been able to attend. And with that, I will turn off my microphone. I'm turning on yours, Deborah, and I bring you Deborah Szekely and Marc Pachter.
Just a word to the audience first. I think Judy beautifully described the spirit of this occasion. I would literally ask you to imagine that you're at a campfire and we are listening to someone we love and honor talk about her journey. It won't be every step of the way. Can you imagine how long we'd be here if we talked about everything that Deborah has done? But we will particularly favor the founding years, but we'll try to get to most of the extraordinary activities she's engaged in. Now I'm going to start with permission to call you Deborah. Good. Deborah, let's begin at the beginning, relatively, in your early years. And I want to begin with a conversation about a very powerful woman with strong ideas, your mother. Can you tell us a little bit about her, somewhat from the vantage point of a young girl who was living the life she had created for her? What was your mother like?
I'm trying to think how best to... She was an individual. She made her own path. She was an immigrant. She came from Austria. She came to the United States because women were free. And she found that they really weren't free, but she did her best. Because she had left her family behind in Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was in Austria where she'd lived, she felt, I think, a little bit guilty or something because she became a nurse. She didn't really like nursing, but she became, she gave back.
Yes.
And was happy at it. And my dad was visiting his brother in the hospital where my mom was the nurse. Oh. And the brother was flirting, and she said, I won't go out. And he said, when I get out, I'll take you out. So she said, I won't go out with you, but I'll go out with your brother. Because the brother was a widow with 2 kids at home and having lots of problems. And my mom loved helping people. And always, as I was growing up, we were always having somebody in our house that Mom was helping. There was always somebody there. usually a woman, a girl who's, going through those 18, 19, 20. And so we always had like a big sister in the house.
Was your mother, I think she had strong views about things?
Oh, yes.
And they were probably not religious so much as secular about society?
Mom was a liberal before the word liberal was popular. We always, in Brooklyn, our house was targeted, so all, the poor people who had no food or something, and sort of vagrants going through would come, and they always could get food at the house. But her strength was that she came home one day, and she'd been to a lecture with the Dr. Philip Welch, who talked about the simple life and healthy and all these things. And she came home and she threw every box, bottle, and can out of the house. And from that day, and we had everything raw. A potato she would just dip in hot water or corn, and that was as far as it went. And my dad just thought she was his savior, and it was fine with him.
So if she wanted to do it, it was okay with him.
And Mom came home one day and said, "We're leaving," and then you must understand that Brooklyn in those days was in depression. And I really remember the men with hats in the bread line. I mean, we were not affected because my father was a partner in a women's cloak and suit factory, it was called.
So the money was coming in.
So we were not affected, probably in sales and stuff, but we would not.
Certainly weren't
We
starving.
weren't threatened by
Right,
that.
you weren't threatened.
So Mom came home one day and said, "We're leaving in 16 days. And my dad said, "Where to?" And she said, "Tahiti." And he said, "Where's that?" She said, "I don't really know, but here are the tickets."
But, okay, an extraordinary woman already. Of course, her daughter is also an extraordinary woman, but we'll get to that. So she's decided on Tahiti, but why? To escape the depression? What was she seeking?
Well, in Brooklyn at that time, the only thing to eat was bananas. And we were on my brother and we would have in the furnace room bunches of bananas ripening. So we played among banana things, not little bunches, the whole big bunch.
Yeah.
She would go down. We still had the chauffeur, and he was the maid's husband, and we would go down and load the back of the car
with bananas.
Green bananas.
Is that because that was the only fresh food?
It was the only thing available. And I don't know what happened, but I think they got bored with bananas. I wasn't part of the conversation.
No, understood. You were about 8 at this time.
When we left, I was 8.
When you were 8. So here's your father. Your father saying, "Yes, we're going to Tahiti, wherever that is." You're an 8-year-old or 7, a little younger. And what are you thinking? Do you think
in those days, children didn't think. They were not asked.
Okay.
They just went along. There was no question of can we go or not go.
You were going.
Mom and Dad.
That was it.
When Mom and Dad want to do something, the kids, and I had a brother, and we just...
I've got to ask, but maybe I'm thinking from a contemporary perspective. Did you think your mother was a little weird?
No, I don't remember thinking that.
Okay.
Later on I did, but not then.
So you're packing because we're
giving everything away because you can't sell anything. And so one of the memories my brother and I used to talk about, everyone came and got a piece of furniture. You couldn't sell in the Depression.
Right.
And so neighbors came from blocks away, and like 3 people came and carried a sofa out, and literally she emptied the house before we left, and everyone benefited from it.
So you get on a train
Boat.
to a ship to?
No, we're in New York, and we get on a ship.
You get on a ship.
And go through the Panama Canal.
Right.
And eventually end up in San Francisco.
Okay, and then from there, how do you get to Tahiti?
Another ship, and it's a 1 month.
1 month on a ship.
One trip a month. It's a 10-day journey, but it's one ship every month.
What is awaiting you in Tahiti? A nice ranch house with running water?
Anyhow, my parents parked my brother and I in a Catholic missionary school, and they went and looked around at the islands and the different places, and then they leased a piece of land because you could not own the property in Tahiti, and Dad found the people who built houses, but they build it out of plaited coconut. They take the coconut leaves and they braid them, and then they put layers of it. And so the roof and the shutters and the walls, the only thing wood was the floor. And the struts, of course.
Yeah.
But we lived in a coconut, and it wasn't a shack. It was the largest house in that area.
Uh-huh. And what did you eat?
Coconuts, no. We ate like we began eating lots and lots of tropical fruit. And we weren't accustomed to so much sugar.
Yeah.
And so we all got boils. And I don't know if people today know, but there are eruptions that come from too much sugar. And I don't know if they could come about today. I have no idea. I've never heard about it having boils these days. But
it happened.
It happened.
It happened.
And one day, we're in Tahiti. We're eating all the wonderful fruit and everything. And we're all suffering from boils. And my dad comes home one day and said, "That's it. We're going to eat like the Tahitians." And so from then on, we ate fish as well.
Ah.
So it's...
And did this establish a lifetime pattern? I mean,
Yes.
I think it's called pescatarian, where it's fresh
Yes.
vegetables and fruit and fish.
Yes.
And to this day, this is your view.
Yeah. And it's still what I eat today.
Now, how do we get you out of Tahiti?
Well, my dad made a bunch of money.
Really?
He was a tailor who had a woman's cloak and suit. He learned English picking up threads in factories, when he came as an immigrant over at the turn of the century. Not this century, turn of last century. Anyhow, he was very picky and sort of very neat and tidy. And it upset him to see all these coconuts laying around, in the ground, etc. And he said, "Can't you do something with it?" And now, my mother learned French, my brother and little Tahitian. My brother and I learned no problem. We learned really well. My father never learned a word of Tahitian or French, but he could have whole conversations back and forth. This one knew a little English, and this one knew, somewhere or other. Anyhow, they explained to him that some idiots, or somebody who's getting married, or has a girlfriend who wants a sewing machine, they make copra, which is taking a coconut and splitting it on a stake and putting it out to dry in the sun. And then they put it in a sack when it gets sort of tiny and dried. And they send the coconuts, and they take the coconuts and the sack down to the Chinese trader, Afong, on the wharf. And then they send it to Marseille, where it's used for cosmetics or oil, machine oil. Fine machine oil. And then 5 months later, they get the money, and the girlfriend is already married to somebody else, and he's stuck with the sewing machine, et cetera, et cetera. Anyhow, so they don't make a lot of copra.
Right.
So my father said, "I'll give you cash." And the term was cash on the barrel head in the old days. It's an old term. And he made a lot of money.
Which meant that
He had to go home and prove that he was a success. We went to Tahiti just under 5 years.
So there was really never an intention of just staying there forever.
My mother was, yes.
From her, but this time he was the strong one.
Yeah.
And he said, "We're going back."
So he went back 6 months in advance
Early.
of us.
Okay.
And bought a chain of dress shops in Northern California.
Okay.
At the time, still the Depression wasn't over, so he promptly lost it. And he never had real money again. And continued life as a tailor.
Where in Northern California is your family now, at that point?
Mill Valley.
Mill Valley. Okay. We're going to wind up getting you married very early.
Yes.
So how is that going to happen?
I married at 17. When I graduated from high school at 16, and it was Christmas time, and we went to visit someone my mom thought very highly of that she met in Tahiti, Professor Edmund Szekely, who became my husband. But anyhow,
Yes.
and she became sort of follower of his
yes.
teachings and his books and everything.
He was very charismatic.
Yeah, and she thought, in any case, she said when we left Tahiti, we're going to be in San Francisco. If you're around, come and stop by. And he stopped by. And he said, I'm going to Guadalajara. And Christmas time, Mom said, oh, why don't we go to Guadalajara? We've never been there. So we went to visit Professor Szekely in Guadalajara. And we got there, his secretary was packing because his father died and he'd been called back to England. And Professor Szekely was a brilliant man who managed never to do practical things. He never learned to drive or to type or go to the post office or balance a bank account. He always had secretaries. He had secretaries.
Yes, got it.
And they did that.
Right.
Anyhow, his secretary was packing, so Mom said, well, let's stay here until this new secretary arrived. And the new secretary arrived. He looked, and his name was Bela, a tall, blonde Hungarian. He looked around Guadalajara in those days and got on this, did something very unusual. He got on the same train he got off because he spent 3 hours in Guadalajara and we were right near the train station and he was gone. Anyhow, so we were waiting for his secretary and my father would be calling and saying, I'm hungry, I want you home. And I don't know quite how it happened, but Mother wasn't anxious for me to start college at 16. And so it ended up with, and there my mother was the strong one because my dad was not enthused, and it ended up by my staying to be his secretary. And I was his secretary for a year. We lived in Uruapan. And on the train going back to San Francisco, where I was going to go back into school, he proposed marriage, and I thought he was wonderful, and so I was married at 17.
Oh. Now, I don't know if there's an answer to this, but you actually wound up calling him the professor your whole life.
Yeah, because he was really super educated and very knowledgeable and in a way very spiritual and it's a sign of respect.
Right, out of respect, indeed. So, and he's twice your age,
Just
roughly.
twice, just double.
Double your age, okay.
But a man at 36 is very attractive.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
So there you are, married, 17, to a spiritual, truly charismatic figure. What was his life philosophy that he would, because by then he was formed, his views. What was he, what did he believe?
Essentially he was an old-fashioned socialist, which is a different period and a different thing,
right.
But believed in the welfare and the well-being of people everywhere. Right. And it's hard to explain. He was so many people in so many ways. You can't really sort of, but I just thought he was God and I loved him dearly. There was a war on.
Yes,
this was 1940. And we were going to England because one of his top students was establishing a center near London in Leatherhead. And everything was arranged, but we couldn't get passage. And in between, his passport expired.
Right.
And he couldn't get it renewed.
And what would that have been? Passport of what? What country?
Hungary.
Hungary, okay.
Actually, Romania, because that Transylvania was Hungarian, and World War I became,
Got it.
But anyhow, but he was Hungarian with a Romanian passport, but it didn't make any difference. But Romania and Hungary both were fighting on the side of Hitler, and so he was persona non grata in the United States with an expired passport.
Which was...
And for the next 9 years, he had no papers. And you can't really... And he was very noticeable. He was a strong personality. And then, you know, you knew he couldn't pass as a Mexican.
Well, why? Well, we haven't gotten you to Mexico yet.
Yes,
So,
anyhow.
why?
So we
why-
went, so we, anyhow, one fine day we had a letter from the United States, what now is called Homeland Security, but that time was Customs and Immigration or something. And it said if he was found in this country June 1st, 1940, he would be returned to his country of origin.
Which would have been a death sentence.
Yes, because I should have said earlier on, he and I are both Jewish.
Right.
And that was not a good,
Fighting
good
for
idea.
the Nazis would not have been
that was,
a
that
good
was
idea.
not an option.
Not an option, right.
And so he had nothing, and so we went, but he did have some friends in Mexico City, and he was hoping he'd be able to get some kind of paper. So in any case, we went to Mexico, and we actually went to Tecate because I wanted to be close to the border to be able to go shopping, and I felt secure being right on the border. It was still there. 77 years later, it was still there.
Yeah.
But he could not get any papers, so he had no papers, and in many ways he was like a prisoner of war. He couldn't leave the ranch. Nobody paid any attention. Mexico City is so far away, and this is the border.
Right.
And so, from the circumstances, there we were.
Well, but you had to make a living, survive.
Well, we started a membership program in his writings, because he was known for his books and his writing and lecturing. And we started every month sending out a newsletter.
From Tecate.
From Tecate. And we charged $10 a year.
Well, that's outrageous.
Yeah, it really was. $10 a year. And we had 30 members, and then we ended up with just under 100 members.
And were
so
they expected to come or just to support?
They received this monthly thing, but that was the source of our guests.
I see.
And we would write and say how wonderful it was in Tecate, and we talk about whatever your weather is, this is better. And
Right.
And he was lecturing every afternoon at 4 o'clock, and people came and
People
stayed.
came from around the world.
And originally, they came and stayed in tents. They bought their own tents. It said, we charged, in the first summer school we did, was $17.50 a week, bring your own tent. And then the next year, I had made wooden frames like a tent. And I bought in San Diego war surplus airplane wing covers from World War I. The World War I, they had wooden wings,
Right.
and so they covered them at night. But they were these surplus wing covers. And so I had a frame, and we put these wing covers on. You know, so it was a tent. We provided a tent.
Yeah.
And by the third year, and this was always a series, everything was like a miracle. It just happened. We were just, things were the right time, right place, right. It just happened.
Right.
That kind
meant
of.
to be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Anyhow, by the third year, we had 20 boxes. There was a army camp called Camp Lockett that was 16 miles away in Campo. And they had a PX, so for shopping, and the neighbors, everybody in the area could go to the PX. And so we had, it's a long story, some English ladies, and they loved going to the PX because they also had a hairdresser there. And in those days, they didn't trust having their hair done in Tecate. And so, because it was really very primitive, and, and water came from out of the well and in a bucket and this and that, and they didn't want to. So they loved going to the camp to have their hair done. So I would go along, and which was interesting. The camp was the last cavalry outpost for the United States Army, and the soldiers were all black.
Ah.
And they were called the Buffalo Soldiers.
Oh, yes, famously.
And they were there at Camp Lockett.
Ah.
And we used to go occasionally because they would do dressage on Sundays, and their horses were magnificent. But the idea of having Camp Lockett and having a cavalry outpost was they were worried that the Japanese, this was 1940s, the Japanese would come
Invade.
from Baja California and invade.
Yes.
And so they wanted the horses to patrol the border.
The border.
And so that was what Camp Lockett was created for, so that these wonderful black soldiers would patrol
Now
the
you
border.
were able to go back and forth because you had an American passport.
Yes.
So you were freer than your
Yeah.
husband, really.
Yes. Well, he couldn't go back and
He
forth
couldn't go back at all.
Not at all. Not for 9 years.
Now, you were living day
In
by
this
day.
little house, in this little house.
Little house.
And living from mail. Like, you know, every day we'd go to the post office and see what we got came in.
Now, to this day, you don't strike me as a woman who's ever discouraged. But were you ever discouraged at that point?
It's not my nature. I'm an optimist.
Yeah. So
No.
you just did it.
Yeah, I never thought, well, there's also no choice. So you don't start thinking of alternatives. There weren't any.
Right.
I was married to somebody I loved who had no papers.
Right. But also you were from a family which had a notion of life that did not require luxury.
Yeah,
You know, it was the
exactly.
fundamentals.
Yeah, no, the wonderful thing about when we got to the ranch is because I lived in Tahiti,
Yeah.
I already knew how to cook over wood stove. I already had used kerosene lamps. We already carried our water.
Yeah.
I mean, so I was preconditioned.
You were.
And so that's why I really feel that where we are today, everything was meant to be. That it's not something that we achieved,
Right.
that we were guided to achieve.
Yes, but you had a little to do with it.
Oh yeah, I did. We were guided. We
Guided,
did it.
But you either did it or you didn't, and you did it.
Yeah.
You did it.
Well, we had no choice.
You had no choice. Okay. I still say a weaker person would have not
Oh, yeah.
responded as
well,
beautifully.
gone to bed and put the blanket over their head.
Exactly. Some people do that.
It's not
but
my
not
style.
You. Not you. So what was his mood like? Was he also an optimist? I mean, he was a European. They're not as optimistic as Americans. Was he brooding? Was he...
He was a happy man.
He was a happy man.
He was a happy man. And his watch, when he greeted someone, he'd say, siempre mejor, always better.
Always better.
And that was his, you know, instead of saying good morning and buenos dias, how are you? Siempre mejor.
Don't you still have that as a motto?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, always better.
Now, you're not sitting there thinking, one day we're going to have 85 buildings and beautiful lands and so forth, but were you thinking, what
As
is going
soon
to
as
happen?
the war ended, we were going to England.
Okay, that was
There
the
was a
plan.
center there. So at no time were we sad or brooding because we knew the war was going to end. We just didn't think it was going to last 5 years.
Right, right.
So when the war ended, 5 years, we were there. Still had no papers, but we felt that could be figured out. Although I'd been to Washington to try to get papers and stuff during the war, but with the war ended, things would be different. It was just at the end of 5 years when we wrote England about maybe coming. They weren't terribly enthused because, as they pointed out, England was suffering from a long, hard war, and they weren't interested in health and spirituality
Right.
and education and
They thought
re-education.
that was a luxury.
Yeah, that wasn't part. So they weren't anxious. So we were there. And so, okay, we're here.
So let's make something of this
Yes.
place.
Yeah.
Tell me
But
about
we
your...
didn't think it would become so glorious and so wonderful and this and that. You don't really think that far ahead. You really think day to day, week to week.
Right,
You make your calendar and your plans and things
right.
a
And see
little
where
bit
it
at a
takes you.
time, yeah.
Tell me about your Mexican neighbors. What are they thinking of this, if I may say so, strange arrival?
We had something very nice happen. My husband, as I said, was Hungarian. And Hungarians are clannish. They support one another.
Yes.
And we had to leave Beverly Hills where we were. And my husband had been lecturing at the Film Institute. The Hungarian have their own film. Actually, all the movies came from Hungary,
Yeah, yeah.
that whole industry. In any case, so they thought this poor Hungarian is stuck there, let's go and help. And almost every week or every other week, someone would come down from Hollywood, with a trunk, and they were little turtleback trailers, with blankets and things for the people of Tecate. I mean, more blankets than we could ever use.
Wow.
And things. And so we were at once very welcomed because we were helping.
You were benefiting the community.
Yeah. And then little by little, we'd start employing one person and two persons and three persons and four persons. And because they had to walk 5 miles from the town to the ranch, almost 5 miles, to the ranch, I scoured San Diego and bought every used bicycle I could find. So everyone knew when they were driving who was our workers because they were on bicycles. So I mean, it became something recognized that funny place, and they called us in the beginning in the press as well as a nudist colony.
Oh, yes.
Because the women wore shorts
Shocking.
and halters.
Shocking,
Yes.
yes.
And we did not allow our guests and staff to go into Tecate unless they were fully dressed.
Out of
In other
respect
words,
for the community.
Yeah. They had to have sleeves.
Yes.
Like going to the Vatican, you know, you can't go with
Right.
sleeveless.
Right.
We didn't let our guests go to Tecate.
And were the English bohemians among them irritated by this?
Yes.
They were.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
demanded this. And,
Well, they had to. I mean,
or they'd have to go.
yeah. I mean, in other words, we became part of the community by
Right.
little by employing and helping. And we bought this, and we didn't have much money, but we bought the first school bus they had so that the outlying kids would be able to go to school.
Yes, yes.
And then we built the first library on the park and bought paperbacks, a set of 5,000 paperbacks
Wonderful.
of world literature and everything from one of the big publishing houses, so they had a lot. So, I mean, you know, we helped create the Tecate that is there today.
Right. And you still
We and the
support
brewery.
it. And you still support it with
Yes.
the foundation. So that's
Yeah.
another root that grew.
Yes.
So now I'm going to look at you from outside. I'm going to look at you from the vantage point of San Diego. A newspaper person comes down, I think it was in 47, and declares that you're nuts, you're all crazy.
We called us a cult,
They called you a cult.
and I cried.
Yeah.
I was so pleased. We'd been there 9 years, and we had really achieved these boxes and you know, these thing. And we were there 9 years, and we had something we were proud of. And we showed the newspaper man around and everything.
Yes.
And he did a big story in the San Diego Union. And I'm so proud of that story now that I got permission from the San Diego Union to make reprints of it that is in every guest room.
Of that story?
Of that story, because it shows how far we came.
Wow.
And how far they came, the people came.
Exactly.
You know, it's not just us.
You know, now, particularly younger people, I think those of us who are older, we remember a time when even vegetarianism was considered crazy. But you basically were fighting a fight for something that now has become common knowledge. But at that point, there weren't very many vegetarians.
We had a young lady who was a ward of a bank, and she came to lose some weight before she was going to go to college. And the letter to us, because we said we were being responsible for her, was by no means is she allowed to take yoga. To him, the idea of yoga, I don't know what it was,
Well, you
but
know
I
what it
mean,
does
but
to
I
the
had to
mind.
guarantee
That
that
she
she
would
would
not.
never take yoga.
It's hard to believe now. Hard to believe. So it grows. It grows as a community. You begin to build buildings there.
Yeah, of course.
How does it grow?
Well, we were very lucky. I started talking about Camp Lockett. There were 20 boxes,
Right.
and they had been built to make for shipping airplane engines, and they were the wrong size. And so some major in an eastern state put them on a flatbed truck and sent them to Camp Lockett. And one day when we went to Camp Lockett, and the rail spur is right down the center of the camp.
Okay.
There were these 20 boxes, and I looked at them and saw windows and doors and thought, there'll be cabins. And so I went to see the officer of the day, and I said, what are you going to do with those boxes? And he said, I don't know. And I said, I really would love to buy them. And he said, well, we'll have to declare them war surplus. And the ranch succeeded from a series of miracles, wonderful things that happened that I always say we were meant to be. Yes. But anyhow, so a month later, I was awarded these 20 boxes. And I think, I don't remember, but in my mind, they were $111.11 I had bid on each one. I wanted to bid $100, but I thought I'd go a little over, and then I got, carried away. Anyhow, these boxes became 20 cabins. But the way we got them was so interesting. He put them up as war surplus, and I didn't know this until afterwards. He had posted the war surplus. This is the major who was running the camp. And he put the notice of the sale of these 20 boxes on the post office door. But when the post office was open, you couldn't see it because the door opened inward.
Right.
And the notice was there. So it was the only bid. And, things like that kind of help.
So basically, people would now pay you more than in the early days for the privilege of living in boxes.
We charged $17.50 a week and 2.5 hours work a day. So because we didn't have a staff, we didn't have money for hire Mexican. We had first two were in the kitchen.
Right.
That was where we began.
Understood.
And someone with the wells,
right.
To dig wells and stuff, but not. And so everyone worked 2.5 hours a day. And lots of them came paying $17.50 and the and the 2.5 hours, thinking they could get out of the work. And I became a very good manager, thanks to that, because they did work. Everyone had their list, and they had to do this and their 2.5 hours and that, because
it was
they
like
were the staff.
Like
they
a
were
commune
the staff.
or a kibbutz or something like
that?
that?
Yeah, very much.
Yes,
very
and
much.
how long might somebody stay? I mean, they're not just coming for a week.
No, I wanted a maximum of 3 months so that in Tahiti people go native after a while, things this and that. And so I wanted, so most of them, there was a lot of turnover, but some of them stayed a long time.
A long time.
Yeah.
Now, let's show up in the 50s. What's happening now? You've established this, you're not going back to England, you have a future you're feeling at Tecate.
Well, we had no choice.
You had no choice, so there you are. Is enough money coming in? Is this being maintained well? Is your husband building a reputation with more people coming? How is it growing? I know it wasn't the goal, but
I'm just trying to think. 10 years, 1940, 1950. What was 1950 like? I really can't figure that out.
It just happened.
And it was just a slow process.
A slow process.
As that people started, and still today coming back every year.
Right.
But because the boxes, we were year round. Originally, we were just summer. And people, 8 people decided they appreciated my husband's teachings, and they built homes. And when they weren't here, we rented them.
Ah.
So we had brick houses with plumbing.
Ah.
And then is when we started digging wells because we needed more water. And we used to plant ice plant. We didn't get beautiful landscape until my daughter came along and grew up and has created great gardens. But it was a very slow process. We weren't. It was really day to day, week to week, month to month.
Let's call it organic.
organic.
It happened organically.
Lovely.
But you've mentioned your daughter.
Yeah.
I was about to say, did children fit into
Yes. And
this
a son
life?
and a daughter.
Okay.
And that is why I got active in San Diego. You started asking that
yes,
question.
Yes.
Because I wanted them to hold their head high. You know, we were known as this nudist colony and these sort of weirdos and all this. And so I wanted them to be respected in San Diego. One, I had to decide early on whether I wanted Mexican kids or US kids, where would they go to school?
Right.
And Mexico in those days had a lot of problems. Now it does not have those particular ones. And I decided US, so they started school in the United States.
I see.
And I sent them to a private school because they kept the gates, somebody there till 6 p.m. at night. So I could get there to pick them up at 6 o'clock.
Right.
You know, public school, you're out at 3:30, what's going to happen to them?
Right, of course.
But there, they could stay and do their homework and be supervised and play until 6 at night.
You were the daughter of unusual people.
Yeah.
They were the son and daughter of unusual people. Do you remember in their childhood, of course I could ask your daughters here, but I am asking you, what did they make of their situation? Did they treasure the uniqueness of that, or did they say, oh, we want to live a normal life in San Diego, and why do we have this complicated life and so forth? Do you remember?
I think children, even at that age, just accepted what was.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I don't know. I never asked
No, you
them.
weren't. Yeah, right.
I didn't ask them that. But, you know, when both your parents say something, you're very likely to, if they're fair and just.
Right, and that's it. If they love you and they want the best for you,
Yeah.
then that's enough.
They say, oh, well.
You become quite a person in San Diego.
Because of I wanted I wanted us to be accepted.
Did you get a house in San Diego then?
Oh yes, we got a home early on.
And at this point, your husband can go to the
Yes.
United States. That's not a problem anymore.
Well, it took 9 years.
Took 9 years.
But yes.
But by the 50s,
yes.
you
1949, he got his papers.
So with the San Diego present, your children in school, what's happening to the rancho? I mean, how is that managed?
I'm still running it.
So
But I have
did
wonderful
both.
staff, but I have wonderful people.
Yeah.
And we started another business called the Golden Door, and I would spend, Friday I'd pick up the kids from school, and we'd go to the ranch Friday night, Saturday, and
Okay.
Sunday, and come back Monday morning very early and dump them back in school. And then I would go over to the door. Anyhow,
Of course you did.
I haven't been very healthy and very energetic, and it worked.
Yes, imagine. Let's talk about the Golden Door, because it is an organized project which has emerged out of some of your ideas, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
But how is it different and how is it the same? What were you looking for when you created the Golden Door?
I was very lucky. We had a few movie people who came to the ranch, but it took a special kind of, the ranch was quite simple, and and they were focused on, and people paid attention. In other words, one of the top movie stars said, I just can't stand exercising and having people look at my big behind.
I feel the same.
Yeah. Anyhow, so there was just the thing, why don't you do a thing placed just for us?
Right.
And that became
That was the idea.
there. And then at that time, Hollywood did not know of diet. They had not a single trainer. They didn't have gyms. They had a very early gym that some people, but I mean, it was a different world, and everyone was punchy and didn't want to be. And so those who had the strength came to the ranch, but this place just for us. So I got a motel, and we had 8 rooms to begin. And it wasn't enough, and it became 12 rooms, and became 18 rooms, and became 24 rooms, and became 30 rooms. I mean,
just naturally.
now it's up to 40, and
Yeah.
that's plateaued at 40 because we can't do the service.
My impression, I don't know Hollywood stars like you know Hollywood stars, but my impression is...
But we don't have Hollywood stars anymore of the kind we used to have.
But those are the kinds you were dealing with.
Yes.
So my assumption is that they have big egos. How do you tell people with those kinds of egos what to eat, when to wake up?
Their livelihood depended
Okay.
on their looks. The camera adds even more weight.
Ah.
And so they were in the habit of starving for 2 months before they had a film.
Anyway.
Of having to starve
Yes.
because they had to look good.
Yes.
And they didn't like that. And they had good doctors in Beverly Hills. And we were part of a trend. It wasn't just us. There was a trend of paying attention to food, not drinking. All this is
Well,
not...
you were ahead of the curve, but
but
the curve finally joined you.
But the trend
Yeah.
was there.
And so...
Anyhow, so at one state, there was an issue of Life magazine that had 100 covers of Life. And I don't remember, but it was 80 or 90 of those on the covers had been to the door.
My God.
Because there was no other place. We had the word spa didn't. It exists in literature, but didn't exist in real life, and was someplace they could go and.
So it's
and was close. Our location, Escondido, is just a little over an hour from Hollywood,
right.
And they could go back and forth. It was so wonderful accidents. In other words, I found a motel that was just right. That was in bankruptcy. Things were just right.
Right.
And so
But you responded to opportunity.
Yes.
You did.
But the door was open a crack, and I pushed it the rest of the way.
That's a good summary maybe of your life. But in any case, so at this point, is it fair to say in America in the 50s and early 60s that the idea of a spa, such as you're creating, is very unusual? Is it happening anywhere else?
Yeah, the spas were all places with wonderful hot springs. We had no hot springs at neither the ranch or the Golden Door. We don't have any of that. But the services, a place where you go, the spas in Europe had a very special role. The towns were full with, everybody used coals. Everything was gray and everything. And you would go out in the country for the fresh air where everything was brilliant. And so the spas in Europe were something that people dreamed of and talked of. And their parents and themselves, it had a mystique.
Yes.
And at that time, that mystique transferred to the door on the ranch. It was someplace you went that magic things happen. And even today, I tell our guests that, in a week, it'll change your life. And it does, because it makes you think, it tilts your perspective, and you look a little bit differently at things. It does last a long time.
The only such community, spa community, that I think of, and I don't know the rich history of it, that in America, in California, as well, is Esalen. And I'm wondering whether that had anything to do, did they get their idea from you? How did that work?
They asked Michael Murphy, who was the creator, had the idea at the ranch. He came to the ranch because Aldous Huxley was doing a seminar at the ranch. And he asked me to come and look at the property, and I went, which he inherited from his grandmother, and I went and looked at it, but I told him I didn't have the time.
Oh, he wanted you to maybe
to be
develop
a partner,
a spa there.
to be a partner.
I see.
And we're still dear friends. But I had all I could do.
But the very fact that you came up with the idea of such a place inspired him.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to...
And also because very important
Yes,
part.
please.
It's not just the body, it's the spirit and the body.
Right.
And so Esalen is more spirit and less body, and we're also sort of even. But the body doesn't exist by, it's just a body. It's the spirit
Right.
that's so important. And the ranch and Esalen both, they're a spiritual experience.
Yes.
So they make you think, they tilt your perspective. You don't just go, and some people just go and come, you know, nothing special. But for most people, it does change their life. And the
Yes.
guests will come up to me and say, you know, this has changed my life.
You were just saying that Aldous Huxley was lecturing. So the part of your program also that's education, that's about life.
Every afternoon, my husband would lecture at 4 o'clock for a long, long time. And then we started doing presenters. For our, in 1960, we did a seminar for our celebrating our anniversary called The Human Potential. And Aldous Huxley and other thinkers were featured. We did another one in 1970. By 1980, we just did a celebration for our anniversary, but we didn't do the special seminar because we were having presentations every night. At the ranch, every single night you have a thinker who's presenting ideas that you may not have,
Right.
or ideas that you may want to pursue. And so we really give a smorgasbord so that you get acquainted with different kinds of philosophies and thinking that you could then go and pursue at home. And not just yoga, but you go to these lectures or that, or you begin reading Buddhism and Zen and thing. It adds an extra element.
I don't want us to finish our conversation without at least acknowledging that you took your energy and your view of the world and of life into the political sphere and the public sphere as well. Can you just briefly tell me why you even ran for Congress? Can you tell me how you switched? Maybe it wasn't a switch, maybe it was an extension.
Progress. I had helped several people get to Congress. You know, I believed in them and asked my friends to support them, which you do still today, everybody. And when I visited them, they found they didn't know what to do because it was so much more complicated. They didn't have any training. Mm-hmm. You know, they're suddenly there, well, what do I do now?
Right.
And so they hire a former chief of staff from somebody else who left.
Right.
And so they're not really progressing, they're just repeating
Right.
and everything. And I spent enough time, because you can't just change people, you have to change the way things work.
Right.
And improve the way things work. Anyhow, listening to these young people who get to Congress, I decided they needed a congressional management manual.
You decided this on your own?
On my own. And I had run for Congress, and I had spent a lot of money, and guest money and friends' money as well as my own, in my run. And I told my kids we had a small foundation, and we had that same amount of money. And since I put the money in the foundation, I didn't have to consult them. I said I was going to go to Washington, and I was going to find a university with graduate students who would do a management manual. Mm. And I outlined a list of contents just to give an idea. And I went to Washington and I began with the alphabet, AU, American University. And I told them what I wanted to do, and I had the money, and I wanted a university to provide a full professor and graduate students whose task was to create a management manual for Congress. Yes. So that the young congressman knows what to do first. 30 days, 60 days, yes, 90 days, yes. All that stuff. And I started with AU, and they took my money, And we're now 30th anniversary of setting course, a Congressional Management Manual.
Which is called the Bible, I believe.
Yes.
Yes. You're also running in time, in the 80s, a federal agency.
Yeah.
How do you develop the patience to do something, to negotiate in that world? Are you
Not patience, it's challenge.
challenge?
I like challenge, and I think one of the problems with aging, there's less challenge.
Oh.
Challenge is sort of walking and moving around and doing things. But I really miss having to get ideas in the middle of the night and scribble them down, and
Right.
things that you want to do or things other people should be doing.
So when you
I still do it, but to a minor degree.
I love this phrase, that other people should be doing.
Yeah.
So you notice that and you do it.
Yeah.
You do it. I just want to celebrate without talking, because it's obvious why you became a philanthropist, because from the very beginning you've wanted to help the wider community. San Diego, of course, particularly its cultural organizations, social organizations, have benefited so much. But rather than talking about that, which is obvious from such a woman that you would do that, I want to end with a discussion about your great love affair, and that is, of course, with Japan. I don't know, because your response to things is so deep. Japan has been one of those passions of your life, too. How did that come to be? And one can see it in the art you collect and so forth. What is it in Japan that has
I don't know.
moved you?
I don't know. It's just, I began reading Japanese mystery stories. I like mystery stories.
Yes.
And, you know, if I wake up in the middle of the night, I'll have different mysteries, and I read a series of that. And I like the pacing and the philosophy that there was in them. And then had I had a different kind of life, I would have wanted to be an architect.
Oh.
And so I looked at magazines more carefully and thoroughly. And there was an issue of House and Gardens, or House Beautiful, one or the other, that was called the Shibui issue. And it featured a wonderful Japanese house in development. And the Golden Door has a building that looks just like that building. You know, so it's the aesthetic and the basic, the simplicity.
The simplicity.
Yeah.
Which really is a continuance in your notion of health, your notion of eating, your notion of living.
And they have very strong eating rules. They have a very good diet.
Yes.
You know, the old one. I'm not talking about today's Japan, but the Japanese diet was vegetables and a little bit of rice. And they called the meat, they called it a condiment.
Yes.
In other words, you would have a little bit of chicken or they didn't have much beef or chicken or fish, and you would sprinkle it on top of your vegetables and rice.
So I see a life immersed in the physical.
Yeah.
To
because
this day,
that's
you're
how I make my living.
in the spiritual and in the visual.
Nice.
Sounds like a perfect life. Do you have any guidance for, you know, sometimes when you talk about your life, you sound a little bit as though it's a series of accidents, and certainly it was accidents, but it was your
And
response.
good fortune.
Good fortune. But it was, I will insist, with the privilege of the interviewer, that it was your response to those opportunities that has really...
Well, yes and no. We live in the shadow of a great spiritual mountain, Mountain Kuchuma, which the Indians call the exalted, high exalted place. It doesn't make sense unless there's some magic there, and it really. And so sometimes I say, you know, perhaps it's a mountain, perhaps it's everything coalesced. And I just happen to be the fortunate recipient of a lot of good coalescing.
That is the last word. Thank you very much.
Let me add one thing. It's very embarrassing to be talking to an audience of friends. I know every one of you. Thank you for coming.
And we thank you both for sharing this evening with us. And I also wanted to thank Roberto Arjona and the Rancho La Puerta, who's sponsoring this evening and have put on a spread for us upstairs. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Deborah, for giving us your time and your thoughts, and Marc for coming out of retirement to help with this discussion, and we'll be able to talk more upstairs. Thank you.